I think organizations and markets is best explained by thinking about the Booth School overall. And a lot of what we do is focus on things from a discipline perspective. And in organizations and markets, that perspective is sociology. So many groups use economics as their perspective, and other groups use psychology. Our group uses sociology. And so the types of questions that we look at and the types of research agendas we have all revolve around sort of this discipline of sociology. And that's one of the key ways of distinguishing organizations and markets from other groups. And that flows into the types of classes we teach, the types of research that we do. We teach classes sort of on two levels. So one we would call sort of the more micro individual level. And so a classic type of class there is a social networks class. And in that class, what we have two sort of objectives. And one of the objectives is to teach a class to MBAs who are going out into the workforce in ways that will help them better their careers. So for us, we encourage people to think about their careers strategically and how their position in a social network affects them. Now, this is not schmoozing. It's much more about the reality of being a manager means you have to get things done, you have to be able to work with people, you have to coordinate resources, whether those are more sort of capital-like resources or human capital type of resources. You have to think about how to deal with a mentor or protege or a colleague or members of a team. And all these things can be thought about and discussed in terms of in social networks. Now, one reason why we teach that is that we have sort of decades of research to draw upon that, that can associate and correlate the type of network one has with how successful they'll be and under what conditions they'll be successful. So students find that very helpful. Now, that's the individual side, and that's why we call it micro. Now, we contrast that with macro, which is more thinking of it in terms of someone who's running a business. And in that way, we are concerned with things like what we would call social structure, but in people who work in companies would often think of it in terms of silos. So I work in a siloed company where me and my folks in my department are doing our work. We're really not coordinating with the folks in another department. How do we get that coordination? What are the sort of things that we might want to do, both in terms of how you design the organization, but also in terms of what one would do as a manager to try to facilitate coordination between different groups. So those are, in terms of what we teach in the classroom, those are some of the ways in which it's discussed. But we cover other things like technology and technology strategy as well, but the same themes would apply to those contexts. There is one way to think about organizations and markets with respect to managerial and organizational behavior is to first say, well, there is actually some overlap, that we are all sort of interested in social behavior and how behavior matters within companies and organizations. Now, one way, though, that we come at it slightly differently is that organizations and markets focuses on the sociology of it. MOB group, managerial and organizational behavior, they're more on the psychology side. Now, for a lot of folks, that might be a very slight difference, but it actually brings up different tools in handling situations. I'll give one. In managerial and organizational behavior, I'll start with that. If you're thinking about the psychology of it, one of the things that they try to think through is making good decisions, and how can you help managers make good decisions. And a lot of it's focused on helping the individual avoid a set of different biases, and how to sort of think about the information that's in front of them. A sociological perspective will say, well, sometimes our decisions are also influenced by who we know, how we're connected within an organization, and not that it is a substitute for psychology. It's something that a manager should know as well as knowing the psychology around making decisions. So that would be one way of thinking about the difference between the two areas. But it's really two groups that complement one another. So in organizations and markets, the people are going to be critical. If you think of markets as being this invisible hand or amorphous, you really, really misunderstand a lot of what's going on. And I would even say the current crisis today is one where if you think of it as amorphous, you're really not going to get a complete picture as to what's going on in the marketplace. These are people making decisions that are connected to one another, that affects the way information flows, which is something which is really important for the way that we try to understand the world. Other things that we focus on is that, well, when particular, let's say, firm or person, when they do something in the marketplace, we really do take that person into account when we try to sort out what's going on. And let's say I'm an academic and I produce a document. Now, if I produce a document and a Nobel laureate produces that same document, people perceive that differently. It's the same document, but people perceive that differently. And we try to walk through and really analytically split that apart and try to understand how much I would have control over that, what I might want to do if I'm not the person with the Nobel Prize and still wants to get my very, very high quality piece of work out there. So we will focus on that. Now, the example I gave was a hierarchical one, but it could be, I could use the same example in a horizontal way, because we would also want people to think of, well, let's say I produce a bill as someone in Congress. That same bill by someone who's a Republican is going to be perceived differently than the same bill as someone who's a Democrat. Well, how can we sort of go beyond that insight? And that's what we do in our area. We try to go beyond that and really sort of separate that, look at the social situations, how people are situated in those, and what that implies for what they can do moving forward. And also, what are the things that are going to affect it, but they may not be able to control as much. For a manager, that same example would be, let's say I'm going to produce a new product. And, well, if I'm producing it and I'm known for coming from this particular industry, people are going to perceive that product differently. Same product as if another company who's coming from another type of industry, that same product is going to be perceived differently. Now, a lot of that's dealing with the reputation that you have, but that's precisely our point, is that these things are actually critical. And if we want to understand how markets operate, we also should think about sort of the sociology of it. Put another way, that people operate in markets not only to sort of buy and sell, but for other things like identity, meaning, being fulfilled. And these are as important as these other factors. Now, much more difficult to quantify. And we spend lots of time trying to quantify these particular things, and that's another big part of what we attempt to do. But it doesn't mean that it's not important. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't really seriously sort of consider these sets of things. A second thing is just to sort of really convey a concept of what we would call social position broadly, but it means everything from how I'm connected to someone or what I'm known as. So I'll give a few examples of sort of what we might mean in this case, and I'll use the one where, let's say, you and I are connected. So we would say, well, organizations and markets will really sort of think through the implications for, let's say, the information that travels between you and I and how that may help. Right? So that's one thing. A second would be this relative deprivation sort of point that, well, we would want to know how my decision making is actually influenced by whom I'm connected to and the decisions that they make. I'm not making my decisions in a vacuum. I'm making it in some sort of social situation, in my social position. Again, that term is the way we think about that, and have people seriously think through those issues, because our research is showing that these things can have a dramatic effect. We want to try to understand those things, and all those sort of very human things for us are just part of understanding what a market really is. I think the first thing to sort of take away with an organizations and markets perspective is that a lot of things that we previously, or that many would think of as random, as well, yeah, social networks helps, but a course on social networks? Is that really something that's necessary? Well, it turns out, again, we've done a lot of work for many years on this area, well before Facebook and well before any of the social network online sites were around, and really seriously trying to ask this question, trying to quantify things, trying to say, well, yes, it seems to be better to have a lot of status. We try to quantify that, and we try to see, well, how much? How much of a difference does that actually make? So one would be the information that flows and the relevance of the information that flows for decisions that are made not only in a company, but in a market where information is flowing sort of all over the place, but not evenly and not uniformly. It could be how my social position affects the decisions I make, and so that would be the relative deprivation sort of point. And then the last is that, well, your social position affects how people interpret what you do, and those are the sort of things that we focus on in organizations and markets, and that's sort of the sociology of organizations and markets here at Booth.